Hey guys, thanks for joining. Um, just going to let a couple more of you guys join before we introduce who we're going to be chatting to this evening. I'm thrilled about it because for one, I've actually never met Wes Larson, who's a wildlife biologist and scientist. And for another, I've actually never seen a bear in the wild. So we're going to be chatting to Wes Larson. I need to find out exactly where he's based, but essentially he's been studying, among other things, black bears and polar bears for the last 8 years. And we're going to be chatting to him this evening about some of the work that he's involved in. And hopefully, certainly for me, it's going to be an education on learning a little bit more about this keystone species and some of the threats that it's facing. So without further ado, let's see if we can get Wes on the call with us. Alrighty, Wes. All right. Wes,
Hey James,
how are you, buddy?
good. How are you?
Yeah, very, very well, thanks. Thanks so much for making the time to chat to us this evening.
Yeah, of course.
Where
Excited,
where are you
excited to
where
talk.
where are you currently based? I see you've been traveling. What looks like from your Instagram that you've been traveling for the last couple of weeks.
A little bit. Yeah, so I'm based out of Salt Lake City, Utah. Um, but I spend a lot of time up in Montana as well. So I've kind of been bouncing back and forth between the two. I do some non-wildlife work up there, and then most of my wildlife stuff is based out of Utah.
Awesome, man. You're initially from Montana, right? You were born in
I am.
Montana.
Yeah. I was born and raised in Missoula, Montana. So yeah.
Awesome, man. And tell me, what is it like being with regards to the COVID crisis? Have you still been able to work? Have you still been able to get your permits and continue with kind of life as normal?
I haven't. It's been quite the strain over here on my stuff. I so that's in Montana. I was actually building a nature trail because I just kind of needed to find something else to do for a few months. It's most of the stuff that I had on tap for this year was through with Great Big Story, doing that series that we do, and it just kind of totally got shut down. So I was lucky enough to do a little bit of research in India on some sloth bears right before everything kind of came to a screeching halt. But yeah, I guess just hoping that it picks up soon again.
Yeah, it's really tough times. I guess there's some there's some hope in that this does come to an end, and certainly we feel we share a very similar I guess path in terms of us being limited in terms of being able to work. We too, all of our productions were cancelled. We're not allowed to travel as South Africans internationally. All our work takes us throughout Africa, so internationally, and we actually don't have any idea when we're going to be able to travel as South Africans.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I guess one of those things, and kudos to you for getting on with it and making the best of what is a tough situation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, hopefully, like I said, it should at some point clear up, but I there's plenty of stuff on the horizon, and luckily I had some other options of stuff to do.
Cool, Wes. Well, I mean, we've never met face to face, but I would love to kind of hear a little bit more about how you, got into doing what you do. I know your passion developed from a young age. I think, growing up in Montana,
Yeah.
and you went on to, I guess, study something that you were always very passionate about.
Yeah, growing up in Montana, there's kind of this mystery and kind of like mystique behind bears. I'm sure it's like the predators that you guys have in South Africa. It's the same thing where if you're out in the bush, if you're out in the forest, they're kind of always in the back of your mind. No matter what you're out there to do, you're kind of always thinking about bears. And so for me, they became this really mythical, amazing animal. And so I I went to college and I decided to go like a pre-med route. I thought I was going to get into medicine. I'd always been obsessed with animals. That's all I ever really was that passionate about. But I thought, I need to do something that's going to make me some money and be stable. And I went and got my undergrad, went and shadowed a doctor. Absolutely hated it. Like I was in the office with him all day and I just was totally miserable. Respect to all the doctors out there, but for me, it wasn't what I wanted to do. And he actually talked to me as a family friend and just said, hey, like, I know you well, and I know like you should be out there working with wildlife. And I kind of knew that's what I should be doing too. So I went and found my mentor, Dr. Tom Smith, who had been working with bears for 30 plus years. And I went in and bugged him and just said, hey, I'm really thinking about getting a master's degree. And he just blew me off and said, oh, I don't have any room for anyone, and especially not someone that, wasn't a wildlife professional already. And I went in every other week for about a year and just got to be friends with him and learned, more about him, and he learned more about me. And then he gave me a job on his polar bear project. And then after I kind of proved myself on that project as a tech, he took me on as a master's student. And and that was kind of the genesis of my wildlife career.
Jeez, that dude literally defined your life. I mean, had you gone the other route, you might not have a smile on your face now, thinking about the work that you're involved in. So yeah,
I owe him a lot.
Amazing, man. And so a lot of it's practical as well. I mean, you've obviously, people often have this misconception that when you're, out there researching bears, it's all practical. And, there's a lot of being a scientist and being a biologist. There's a lot of, papers that you need to write. There's a lot of research involved. There's a lot of time behind the computer that often people don't see, right?
Totally. So I just barely published a paper on polar bear human interactions and disturbance. And that paper took, I don't know, like 4 or 5 years to write. It was, wow. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of office time, a lot of writing, a lot of editing, looking for money, looking for support. There's a million things that go into it. And it's not the typical stuff that we post online just because it's not that interesting, I'm like, I posted my paper online, but as far as photos of me sitting in the office writing, there's not going to be that many of those. But that's part of it. And that having that paper come out, especially that polar bear one, was really gratifying because it was a paper that we had worked on for a long time, and it was something that is going to directly affect polar bear conservation.
And you've also spent time in Africa. I see you worked with the African Pangolin Conservation Group as well as the Endangered Wildlife Trust, and got introduced to some of our wild dogs.
I did. Yeah, that was honestly one of the best trips of my life.
Awesome, man.
I grew up watching, just African documentary after African documentary about wildlife. And so I've always been obsessed with African wildlife, and wild dogs especially were one that I was really interested in. So getting over there to work with Endangered Wildlife Trust and with Cole, and then again with African Pangolin Working Group, and with, sorry, I'm drawing a blank, with Ray and Francois over there. It was honestly just like the best trip I ever could have put together. Both of those species are just amazing. Seeing a pangolin in the wild, we tracked one down that had a transmitter on it, and seeing that one. And then I actually saw one in Kruger as well, which was, I guess, an incredibly rare sighting. So yeah, I absolutely loved South Africa. It was a dream trip.
Awesome, dude. No, you're so lucky. I mean, tracking a pangolin down with a telemetry machine is one thing, but actually seeing one in the wild, they're guides that work for, 10 years at a time, going out twice a day, literally with a tracker to find animals. And, they haven't witnessed a pangolin in the wild. So that's pretty special.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Cool, man. Well, I guess the reason why I wanted to chat to you is to, chat about your work specifically with regards to bears, and, just seeing how you use, like you say, your background, which is a scientist, but at the same time, social media to educate people about, your subject, I think is really awesome. And I thought we could start off. I'm going to see if I can pull up a photo here. Let's see if it works. Can you see it on your side?
Yeah.
A photo of you literally in a bear's den. And I guess, again, for me, it's a little difficult to understand, how dangerous the situation is because, I'm not familiar with bears or their behavior. But essentially, it looks like you're sitting with a mama black bear in her den, right?
Yeah, so this was actually a male. This and yeah, it's funny because depending on that species, that's either like the most dangerous situation that you could ever be in, or one that's relatively under control. And this was a black bear, an American black bear, and they're the one bear species that I know of that you can actually go into their dens and sedate them in the den like this. The difference is generally the den is shallow enough that I can be outside of it, and I have a syringe pole that I can just simply stick inside the den and sedate the bear from outside. This particular den was like 80 feet long, so that's like
Wow.
30 meters, and it was pitch black. And that bear, you can see in there, it was just wide enough for that bear, so there wasn't a lot of room in there. And yeah, I mean, they're a species that we understand their behavior well enough that we feel comfortable doing this sort of thing, but it is still a dangerous situation. It's still a huge animal that has the ability to really do a lot of damage. They're hibernating at this point, so they tend to be asleep, but then they hear us coming and will wake up. You can see this bear is pretty wide awake. So the whole way I was crawling in, he was watching me and I was watching him. But it does take them generally about 10 minutes to start kind of to be mobile. So I've got some time to get in there and hopefully get a needle into them before they're fully awake. Um,
Is
yeah.
that something you think about, like with regards to darting these bears and doing whatever work you need to do on them, whether it's fitting a collar or whatever needs to be? Do you generally do it while they're hibernating because they're more docile?
Yeah, I mean, so we typically put the collar on initially in a trap. So it's like a big barrel that the bear essentially crawls into. There's a treat hanging from it. It pulls on that treat, a door closes, and then we check those traps every single day and sedate the bear within the trap, put a collar on it. But for collar checkups and just for like a general health assessment on the bear, these den visits are really great because we know exactly where the bear is because it has its collar on. We know it's not going anywhere because it's there for the winter. And because it is asleep, it gives us this ability to get pretty close to it. As you can see, this one I got really close. But yeah, it offers a really good opportunity to not have to place the animal under as much stress as a trap or chasing it down with dogs or something would do.
For sure. And the reason for you using a extended pole with a syringe versus, like a dart gun,
Yeah,
where you have to actually get really close to the bear. I mean, again, I'm picturing myself climbing into, a tunnel, which is incredibly deep. It's dark, you can see the
yeah,
flash is actually reflecting in that bear's eyes. It's pitch dark, and you're now
yeah,
having to probe this bear with a syringe or with a needle rather than actually firing a dart.
yeah. I mean, the thing about that, you brought it up is like this is a tunnel you wouldn't want to crawl in, even,
No,
knowing that there's a bear inside. Like even without the bear, it's not a fun little tunnel to crawl into. And
no.
then knowing there's a bear in the back is incredibly scary. But to your question, those dart guns tend to have some sort of explosive charge in them, especially with the bear where you have to get through hide and fat. It really needs to rock it in there to deliver that medicine or to deliver the sedative. And so it does some more damage. It's not anything that a bear can't, bounce back from pretty easily, but it is a little bit more destructive to use a dart gun on a bear. And so for us, the syringe pull is just like a really easy, highly effective way to do it. And it's a lot easier on the bear. It's literally like it's just getting an injection. Um, and the nice thing about these den visits is because it isn't as kind of stressful for the bear when you're, as firing a dart into it, I don't tend to have them explode at me after I, give them that syringe. It generally just goes in and out and they're fine. And that's actually what happened with this bear is I got within 8 feet of him, extended that syringe pole, gave him the sedative, but because he was front facing like he is, I couldn't get him right where I wanted to. And it took a lot longer than I wanted for that sedative to kick in. And he actually came crawling out. So I had to crawl out kind of at the same rate as him. And then he came out of the den. And in the meantime, I had loaded up a hand syringe really quickly. And I had to go and physically pull his legs out from under him. He fell down on the snow, and I jumped on top of his back and gave him a hand syringe, and then just held him down in the snow until he went all the way under. Now, at that point, he was like half groggy, so I could do that. If he had been moving full speed, I definitely wouldn't have jumped on his back. But I knew that enough of the sedative had kicked in that I could restrain him.
I can see a couple of mates of mine who are from Africa and have a lot of experience, working with animals are getting quite a kick out of this.
Yeah.
Someone asked, would you be able to do the same thing with a grizzly bear? I think that's quite a cool question. I wouldn't know.
You
Not
definitely
quite.
can't. That's the second you start crawling in that grizzly bear den, it's going to come out and maul you. And there's actually a number of people that have died from just being in the wrong place at the wrong time near a grizzly bear den. And then there was a team of Norwegian researchers that actually tried sedating grizzlies in their den. And what they would do is they had this huge steel grate that they would run and put on the entrance of the den, and then they'd pile like 4 or 5 guys on it. And there was a hole in it that they would try and sedate the bear through. And like 4 or 5 of those researchers ended up getting mauled. It like did not work. So it's really only with American black bears that I'm aware of that you can do these kind of den visits.
So essentially, I mean, you're monitoring these bears. So I guess you're looking for tracks that quite easily you can see whether a bear den is active or not. I assume just by looking outside the den. But you've gone inside the tunnel. You've had to use a torch because it's incredibly dark. You've got the dart in. What next? Does the bear vocalize? I mean, obviously it reacts to being jabbed by a needle. Is it breathing as you climb down there? Can you hear the
Yeah.
bear as you?
Yeah, so generally when they're feeling defensive, they make like a noise, and they'll clack their jaw. They make this really strong jaw popping noise too. And then it'll swing its head back and forth. And that's just kind of the bear letting you know that, hey, I'm a bear. Like, what are you doing in here? And these guys, black bears are kind of top dog in this ecosystem where we're working. So there's nothing that's going to be crawling inside their den aside from other bears. So sometimes I just feel like they're pretty confused, what I'm doing in there. But yeah, so they do vocalize. In an ideal situation, again, I don't even have to go in. In an ideal den, it's shallow enough and I can see the bear that I can just extend that syringe pole and get him from outside. When I do get in, what I typically will do is sedate the bear and then pile a bunch of stuff in front of the den entrance so that the bear feels like it's stuck in there and it's calm and there's no more threat. And that typically is enough to keep them in. Now, I've had a couple times, especially with male bears, where I've sedated them and then they just want out. And this one was slow enough, again, that I could restrain it. But I had one that just was coming at me, and I was putting my foot on its face and just trying to keep it in its den. And it finally bit my boot and kind of shook it a little bit and was swiping at me. And I finally just had to call that one and just let it go. And so that bear ran and probably passed out somewhere for a couple hours and then woke back up and was fine. But we weren't able to do the procedure that we were hoping to do that day.
And Grant, this is for you. Grant Telfler is asking, once it's sedated, what then? In this particular case, you were removing a collar. Obviously, you need to monitor these animals' behavior so that you can research them. But I also see you've posted a couple of pictures where you've obviously found a mom and she's got 2 little cubs or a cub. I don't know how many they have at a time. And it gives you an opportunity, I guess, to also, have a look at those cubs, the condition of them and how these, animals are, reproducing each year. See if I can pull up a pic.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, that's kind of our best day is if we get a female that has cubs, because A, we're seeing that species, continue on and pass on their genes to the next generation, and B, it's just really an amazing opportunity to be able to hold some black bear cubs while you're working on their mom. The cubs get really stressed out. They don't want, they don't want to leave their mom, but while we're kind of rolling her over and playing, messing with her collar and doing some different checkups on her, we don't want to leave the cubs with her. So we keep them warm, we hold them. We often get the question, oh, doesn't that get them used to humans? And it really doesn't. They aren't happy to be away from their mom. If anything, it's teaching them that humans aren't something that they should like, which is a good lesson for any bear. So yeah, that's part of that process, is just getting a reproductive survey, seeing how many cubs have been born in the area. And then the other part of it, the main reason we're sedating these bears is just, it gives us a really good option to put new batteries in their collars to make sure that collar hasn't tightened up too much. Bears go through this period called hyperphagia, where in the fall, they're just completely gorging themselves to get ready for that hibernation period. And they tend to put on a bit of weight. And so the collar that we put on in the spring or summer will get a little tight. So it gives us a good chance to get in there, loosen up that collar, make sure everyone's doing fine, and then count for cubs.
And is all your research that's being done in Bryce Canyon? Could you give us like a bit of a background to kind of the area of operation?
Yeah, so all of my black bear research was in Bryce Canyon. That project recently wrapped up, but the whole idea behind that project was the national park had some issues with black bears breaking into people's campsites, and they actually had a bear ripped through her tent and swatted her, and really gave her a good scare. And they'd had some other incidents too, and they were really curious to know what they could do to make their campsites safer for visitors and less attractive for bears. So what we did is we threw those collars on, and then we could track the bears and see exactly where they were spending their time, what kind of resources they were using in the area, and then go into each of those campsites, look for those kind of resources and features. And then if the campsite had stuff that was really attractive to bears, we wrote up different recommendations for them, as far as getting rid of those attractants and making them less appealing for bears, so that the visitors had a lower chance of having a bad encounter.
And like traveling into, I guess if you compare it to, heading to Zim or South Africa or wherever you experienced, the wild dogs or the pangolins, I mean, heading into Bryce Canyon, what are your chances if you were going for like a trail run, or if you were going for like a couple day hike into Bryce Canyon? What are your chances of actually seeing a black bear?
Pretty slim. It's not a really high density population. In fact, when we started on that project, a lot of people in the area were saying, "Oh, there aren't any bears here. You're not going to find anything."
No ways.
Yeah. And so for us, just catching them was like a real victory, and showing that there was a population there.
Amazing, man.
Yeah. So not too many people not too many visitors are going to see them. If you see a bear in Bryce Canyon, you really lucked out.
And there's another, I mean, you've also spent a lot of time researching a completely different species, the polar bear. Someone asked a little earlier about, you working with polar bears. Again, I've never seen one in the wild. They certainly have a reputation. And I think your work was mainly done in Alaska with regards to the research on the polar bear.
Yeah, exactly. So I worked in northern Alaska, right on the coast of the Arctic Ocean. I was working with Brigham Young University and Polar Bears International on that project. And what we were looking at was disturbance levels with bears and the oil industry. And, at what level the oil industry was actually displacing, disturbing, affecting denning females with cubs. So the difference with polar bears is with black bears, just about everyone's going to den up. If they're in a place that gets cold at all, males, females, yearlings, they're all going to go into a den in the winter. With polar bears, it's just the pregnant females that den. So if you're born a male polar bear, you're only going to be in the den that once, and then you never den up again. Yeah. But with a pregnant female polar bear, they'll dig a snow den, snow's over top of them, and they have their cubs inside of that snow den. And the issue up there is that these dens are impossible to see with the naked eye. They're really hard to find. And the oil industry has this mandate to completely avoid them. So if a polar bear den pops up, they have to give it about a 1.6 kilometer buffer. And our kind of mission with that project was to look to see if that buffer was sufficient, and to see if, there was any extra measures that needed to be taken to protect denning female polar bears.
And I mean, polar bears again, challenges working with these animals. I think I saw a shot of, I'm sure human wildlife conflict is an issue up there, just like it is here in Africa. I mean, this was an image that I snapped off your Instagram of, just showing how close, these bears will venture to, I guess, human habitation.
Yeah. Yeah. So that right there is, her den was within 5 meters of that roadway, that bear. And so she picked that den site, and then, it caused some real problems for oil industry, which I don't have a lot of sympathy for them. I was fine with advising that we just completely shut that roadway down, and that's what happened. They had to completely shut it down. And then what we did is we put a remote camera on that bear, and it was one that we could access remotely, and so we could see if she had come out and if she had actually abandoned the den site naturally with her cub. And that's what ended up happening. Is she came out, she spent a few days by the den and then left. And as soon as that happened, we let them open up their operation again. But yeah, there's a lot of challenges to working with them. Number one being the cold. It's, the Arctic in winter isn't an easy place to work.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and up there, the Alaskan Arctic is very different from some of the photos of the Arctic that you've seen of like Svalbard or the Canadian Arctic, where you have these big sweeping vistas with like huge glacial, chunks of ice and everything. It's just a flat white sheet of tundra. There's hardly anything up there. No mountains, no trees. It's just flat and white and frigid. And so it's constant wind. We would see, temperatures of negative 60, 65 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
Which, yeah, I'm not sure what that is in Celsius, but it's really cold is what it is. Yeah. And yeah, that's the biggest thing is avoiding frostbite, avoiding any kind of an injury for the cold. As far as the bears, we're working with females that are pretty content to just hang out in their dens, so we didn't really have any problems with them. But yeah, the cold is a real issue.
And kind of generally speaking, with regards to bear conservation, sadly, in Africa we don't have any bears, or at least the Atlas bear, which I guess is a modern day bear in Africa, is pretty much gone, or believed to be extinct. But in terms of bear conservation, are we concerned? I can imagine with obviously global warming, the polar bears are at greatest threats, and this is coming from obviously not knowing much about these animals, but generally are bears threatened at the moment?
Yeah, it's a good question. And so first of all, I love talking to South Africans about bears, because I think it's when I was over there, anytime I told someone I was a bear biologist, they were so fascinated by it, because you guys don't have any bears. I think it'd be
It's
the
such a
same as
novelty for us.
yeah, I think it'd be the
Yeah.
same as if you went to the States and said you're a lion biologist or something, suddenly everyone like perks up. But yeah, so there's 8 species of bears. In North America, we have three. We have the American black bear, brown bear, or we call them grizzlies over here, and then polar bears. And so I'll start with those guys. We'll start with the one that's doing the best, which is American black bears. They're incredibly adaptable animals. They're good at living on the fringes of human societies. They're doing pretty great. They're widespread. Again, like their main kind of thing they have going for them is their adaptability. They can switch from a lot of different food sources, and they mostly eat vegetation, which is pretty easy for them to find. Grizzly bears they're rebounding in a lot of their main populations here in the States. They, however, are not nearly as adaptable as a black bear, and they require much larger tracts of wilderness to survive. They're not as good as kind of existing on the fringes of our communities. So while they're doing better, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done for grizzlies. They've lost a lot of their range, and we're hoping to. I know there's a lot of great biologists that are working on extending it. But worldwide, they're doing okay, because that same bear is found in Russia, in Eastern Europe, in Canada and Alaska. They're all the same species. It's a brown bear. And in a lot of those places, they're really thriving. So in the States, we have some work to do with brown bear conservation, but on a whole, they're doing okay. Polar bears are really the one for North American bears that are in trouble. And again, that's just because of climate change. They're an incredibly niche species in that they really only feed on seals. And to catch seals, they need the sea ice to hunt them. They use that sea ice, yeah, as a stalking platform, as a way for them to get close enough to seals. They can't pursue them in the open water. So without the sea ice, they simply can't get their food source. And that's what we're seeing happening already. We're seeing in some populations a total reproductive failure. Body size is declining. A lot of there's 19 subpopulations of polar bears, and more than half we're seeing declines in. There's only one or two that are increasing or staying stable. The rest of them are all really in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, that's sad. Did you say 19 populations worldwide?
Yes, in 19 subpopulations, and really the only ones that we're seeing, remain stable and even increasing are the ones in the high Canadian archipelago, where there's just ice throughout the year, and they can, continue to hunt seals. But there are projections that by the end of the century, we're going to start losing that ice as well. And as soon as you lose ice in one of those subpopulations, you start losing your bears. So the population I worked with in Alaska, we've already seen a 50% reduction just in the last probably 20 years.
And I guess, some scientists in your field will argue that, I guess in the next century that, we'll lose polar bears altogether.
Yeah, there's a real possibility of that. I do think the thing that polar bears have going for them is they're such a charismatic animal, and so many people care about them that that there hopefully, will be some sort of way that we can preserve some of their habitat. The thing that they have going against them is that the issue facing them is one that all of humanity needs to tackle to solve. It's not, stopping a poaching trade or reducing habitat fragmentation. It's every single person on the planet has to change their behavior to save polar bears. So I don't know. It is it's a depressing animal to study, but I do have hope for their future. I think they have some real smart people fighting for them. And I'm not talking about myself. I'm like Polar Bears International, some of these other groups that are really doing a lot of great work to protect polar bears and to make sure that our kids and our kids' will have them.
And what about some of the other species that are maybe like a little less known?
Yeah.
Again, in the East, we've heard of, people using bear bile, so extracting bile from a gallbladder in traditional medicine. Is there a lot of truth in that? I mean, I've seen images of bear farms which look rather disturbing.
Yeah, unfortunately, for a lot of those bears in the East, in Asia and the Indian subcontinent, that's kind of what is their main threat is poaching, specifically for the traditional medicine trade. So most of those bears that you're seeing that are in those bile farms are Asiatic black bears, and it's just a total horrific practice. To literally, keep them all cut up and to be, taking their bile, periodically in these little cages. It's really a terrible practice that needs to stop. Yeah, and then in the wild, a lot of bears are poached for that same trade. So over there, we've got Asiatic black bear, sun bear, sloth bear, which are three species that are just native to that part of the world, and they all three are under great threat from that trade. I recently got to work with sloth bears in India, and that was really a neat experience. Yeah, and they're all three. All three of those species are really cool, interesting bears that I think a lot of times kind of are under the radar as far as bear science goes. I don't think too many people have heard of them, but they're really cool species. And then the other ones that we're missing. So the other Asian bear is a panda bear, which everyone's heard of and everyone knows about. But they're one that's actually seeing a little bit more success, and they've kind of figured out how to breed them in captivity and then release them into the wild. So we're seeing some success in panda conservation and rehabilitation. And then there's the spectacled bear in South America, which is the only South American bear, lives in cloud forests. And
No
to be
ways.
honest, yeah, it's probably the one I know the least about, but they're a really cool bear.
Awesome. Yeah, that's fascinating. I guess I'm also just really interested in knowing, what's your next step, because you've obviously finished this, chapter with regards to working with the black bears in Bryce Canyon.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've actually finished your paper on, the polar bears up in Alaska, but now that COVID, all things considered, COVID, we don't know how long it's going to last for, but what is your plan, kind of, going for your 5-year plan for the next couple of years? And is it going to be focusing on bears or a broad number of species?
Yeah. That's a great question. It's one I've been asking myself a lot lately. I, I think like a lot of people in the world, my plan felt pretty solid and good up until March, and I'm still kind of putting it together. What's next for me? The series that I do with Great Big Story, Mission Wild, has been just kind of my dream job because I get to travel all over and see what other biologists are doing and teach people about conservation and show kind of that behind the scenes view into wildlife biology, which is something that I think is pretty novel and that not too many programs have done. And that was really, yeah, to be honest, like that was kind of where I was moving a lot of my eggs, I guess. But now, I don't know. I mean, I'm still hopeful that things will kind of come back on and that we'll be able to continue doing that work. As I mentioned, I just started working with a nonprofit on sloth bear research and was hoping to do some more work with them, and that's kind of all tabled right now too. So I can't give you a great answer. I mean, I'd love to stay in the media realm and then also have a foot in research. I'm for the last couple years, I've been, for all intents and purposes, a freelance wildlife biologist, and I'd love to continue doing that. But we'll just see if that's viable or not. And if not, I'll probably get a job with either state or federal government here in the States working with wildlife.
Yeah, again, I think we're all so much in a similar boat, from my own perspective with regards to being involved in tourism. We host
Yeah,
safaris all over Africa, and we're also waiting to see, what happens, for the next foreseeable future. It could be 1, 2, 3, 4 years, depending on, how long this
totally.
thing lasts for and the knock-on effects. And again, with filming and getting permissions to travel, it's been incredibly tough. So yeah, share your challenges at the moment, and again, I think I just want to just thank you for making the time. I think this has been a great release for me in terms of talking to people we've worked with in the past in conservation, and also learning more and meeting people like yourself abroad, and learning a little bit more about what you do. And yeah, I really appreciate you making the time to chat to us today.
Yeah, I appreciate you reaching out. And if you're ever over here, I'd be glad to take you out and try and find some bears.
Awesome, man. I'd love that. Last thought, if is anyone who's tuned in, and there have been a couple of questions that sadly we haven't got to, if there is anyone that's tuned in and wants to, somehow get involved, or, obviously they can follow you at GrizzKid on Instagram. But if they want to somehow get involved, whether it's specifically in the two species we've talked to, either black bear conservation or polar bear conservation, is there somewhere we can direct them to?
Yeah, with black bears, there isn't like a really great like nonprofit that's working specifically with them, and that's just because they're doing pretty well. With Polar Bears International is a really great one to look into. They have really kind of spearheaded the charge on polar bear conservation. They've got some amazing scientists working with them, so that's who I would look into. And then I'm really passionate about grizzly conservation, and both Vital Ground in the United States and Grizzly Bear Foundation in Canada are two really great organizations that are doing a lot to extend grizzly habitat and connect already existing grizzly habitat. So those are some good ones you guys could look into.
All right, awesome, Wes. Well, Dude, thanks so much. This has been such an education for me, and I've learned so much just during this conversation. So I appreciate it, and hopefully I will
Yeah.
see you in the US at some stage.
Yeah. Sounds good, James. You take
Cool,
care out
brother.
there.
You too. Cheers, man.
All right. We'll see you.